A boot slammed against a steel gate hard enough to rattle the chain, then a fist, then a shoulder driving into the metal like it owed somebody money. On the other side, a dog started barking low, ragged, the sound of an animal that had been hurt before. A man shoved a woman backward into the gravel. Her duffel bag split open. Everything she owned rolled across the dirt. Nobody moved to help her. 6 bikers just watched. The woman got up. She didn't run. She wiped the blood off her lip, picked up a faded leather ledger, and held it against her chest like it was the only thing that mattered. Her name was Della Voss, and the tattoo on her wrist was about to stop a club president cold. What did that faded mark mean to a man who'd buried his brother? Stay with me on this one. The gray pickup that dumped her there was already gone, peeled out down the county road, gravel spitting off the back tires, taillights swallowed by the dark. Nobody caught the plate. Nobody tried. And Della Voss just stood there in front of the gate, breathing hard, waiting for 6 strangers to decide what to do with her. Now here's the thing about a place like the Iron Saints Clubhouse. It's not a business. It's not a bar. It's a family that happens to wear leather, and families don't open the door for anybody who knocks. Especially not a woman nobody's ever seen, bleeding from the mouth, dropped off like a bag of trash by a man who couldn't get gone fast enough. The one who came to the fence first was young, called himself Rooster, though nobody remembered why. He had his hands stuffed in his cut, and a look on his face that said he'd already made up his mind before he ever reached the gate. "We're closed," he said. "Whatever you're selling, we're not buying." "I'm not selling anything," Della said. Her voice was steady. That surprised him. A woman who'd just eaten a fist across the face and her voice didn't shake at all. "I'm looking for work." Rooster almost laughed. This looked like a place that's hiring. "You've got a clubhouse, somebody cooks, somebody keeps the books, somebody cleans up after 20 men who don't." She wiped her lip again with the back of her hand. "I can do all 3. I'm good at it. Give me a cot in the back room and 3 meals and you'll never think about any of it again." Behind Rooster, the others drifted closer. Big men. The kind of big that comes from work, not the gym. One of them, an old-timer they called Preacher, folded his arms and squinted at her like she was a math problem he didn't feel like solving. "Lady," Preacher said, "you got beat up in our driveway by some fella in a truck. That's your business, not ours. But we're not a shelter. We're not a charity. And we sure as hell aren't taking in a stranger who shows up with trouble already following her home." "I'm not asking you to fight anybody's trouble," Della said. "I'm asking for a mop and a stove." "They never just want the mop," Preacher said. "You feed a stray once, it belongs to you. And whatever's chasing it belongs to you too." That should have been the end of it. That's usually where a story like this ends. The gate stays shut. The woman walks off down the road and the men go back inside and forget her by morning. But it didn't end there, because of the dog. There was a German Shepherd inside that fence. Big one, near 100 pounds, gray around the muzzle, with a scar that ran from his left ear all the way down to his shoulder where the fur never grew back right. His name was Diesel, and every man in that club knew one thing about Diesel: he didn't like people. He tolerated the members. He'd bite anybody else. 3 years, and he'd never once let a stranger touch him. Rooster still had the mark on his forearm from the week they brought the dog home. Diesel walked up to that gate, pushed his nose through the gap in the metal, and leaned into Della Voss's leg like he'd been waiting for her his whole life. The men went quiet. Della crouched down. She didn't reach for the dog. She just held still and let him press against her, and the big shepherd made a sound none of them had ever heard him make, a soft, broken whine, the kind a dog makes when it finally comes home. "That's not possible," Rooster said under his breath. "That dog put me in urgent care." And that's when the door of the main building opened and Boone Callahan walked out into the yard. Boone was the president. 51 years old, silver in his beard, shoulders like a door frame. He didn't yell. He didn't have to. When Boone moved, men got out of the way, and when Boone spoke, men listened. He came across the gravel slow, looking at the dog, then at the woman, then at the dog again. "Diesel doesn't do that," he said, "not to her, to himself." "He knows I won't hurt him," Della said quietly. Boone stopped a few feet from the gate. His eyes went down to the ledger she was clutching against her chest, cracked leather, corners worn soft, a strap wound twice around it. Something crossed his face. Then his eyes moved to her wrist, where her sleeve had ridden up when she crouched, and he saw the tattoo. It was small. Faded blue-green, old ink gone soft under the skin. A shield with 2 crossed arrows, and a single word beneath it, in letters too worn to read from where he stood. But Boone didn't need to read it. He'd seen that mark before. He'd seen it 1,000 times. He'd seen it on his little brother's arm in an open casket. For a long moment, Boone Callahan didn't say anything at all. The whole yard held its breath. Even the wind seemed to stop. "Where," he said finally, and his voice had gone rough, "did you get that ink?" Della stood up slow. She pulled her sleeve down, but it was too late, and she knew it. "You already know where," she said, "or you wouldn't be asking like that." Boone stepped to the gate. Up close, she could see his jaw working, see the muscle jumping in his cheek. "Open it," he told Rooster. "Boss." "Open the gate, Rooster." The chain came off. The gate swung wide. And Della Voss walked into the yard of the Iron Saints with a dead man's dog glued to her leg and a dead man's notebook against her heart. And not one of those 6 men understood yet what had just walked through the door. Boone led her inside, sat her down at the long table where the club held church. Somebody put a bag of ice in front of her, and she pressed it to her lip without being told twice. Diesel lay down across her boots and put his chin on the floor and didn't move. "Talk," Boone said. "Can I ask you something first?" Della said. "Did you have a brother?" The room got cold. 20 years of stories, and nobody in that club had ever asked Boone Callahan that question straight to his face. The men who knew him best looked at the floor. They knew there was a name Boone didn't say out loud, and they knew better than to say it for him. "I had a brother," Boone said. "Cole, younger than me by 8 years. He joined up at 19. He came home in a box 3 years ago. They told us it was an accident overseas, a vehicle rollover on a supply route. Closed casket, except we made them open it because our mother wouldn't believe it was him until she saw." He put both hands flat on the table. "That tattoo on your wrist is his unit, his exact unit. So before you say one more word, you'd better be about to tell me the truth, because I have spent 3 years wanting to hear it from somebody who was there." Della set the ledger on the table between them. Her hands were shaking now, not from the punch, from something older. "I was there," she said. "I was the medic. I'm the one who held your brother's head in my lap when he died. And Boone, it wasn't a rollover. It was never a rollover. You could have heard a pin drop in that room. His name was Cole Everett Callahan," she went on. "He had a scar on his chin from a bicycle when he was a kid. He talked about his big brother back home who ran a motorcycle club in Montana, said if he ever got out clean, he was coming here to ride with you. He carried a picture of your mother in his helmet. He used to say his brother taught him everything worth knowing before the age of 10, and everything worth forgetting after. And this," she touched the ledger, "this was his. He wrote in it every single day. He made me promise if anything ever happened to him that I'd get it to you, not mail it, not ship it, put it in your hands. It took me 3 years to find you, and it took them about 3 hours after I did to catch up with me." "Them," Boone said. "The men in the truck." Della looked up at him. "The same people who killed your brother." Diesel lifted his head off the floor and stared at the door. For a while nobody spoke. Then Boone reached out and pulled the ledger toward him, slow, like it might break. He unwound the strap. He opened the cover, and there on the first page, in handwriting he'd known since he taught the kid to write it, were the words, "Property of C.E. Callahan, if found, get to Boone. He'll know what to do." Boone Callahan put his hand over his mouth and turned his face away, and not one man in that room pretended not to see it. He turned a few pages after that. Dates, weather, a joke about bad coffee, a line about a sunset that a 19-year-old had no business noticing and wrote down anyway. And then the pages changed. The handwriting got tighter, smaller, faster. The way a man writes when he stopped keeping a diary and started keeping evidence. Boone stopped on one of those pages and read it twice and set the whole thing down very carefully, like it had gotten heavier. He knew, Boone said. Reading this, he knew what was coming. He knew, Della said, and he kept writing anyway. That's who your brother was. That night Della cooked. It wasn't a plan. It just happened. She got up from the table, found her way to the kitchen, and started pulling things out of the fridge like she'd worked there for years. Nobody stopped her. The men didn't know what to do with the grief hanging in the air, so they let a stranger cook it out of them. She made a pot of chili big enough to feed a platoon, cornbread from a box she found in the back of the cupboard, coffee strong enough to strip paint. And one by one, the Iron Saints drifted into that kitchen and sat down and ate. Preacher, who 2 hours ago wanted her gone, went back for a second bowl. "This is better than my late wife's," he admitted, "and I'll deny I ever said it. She'd rise up out of the ground and box my ears." Rooster laughed for the first time all night. Somebody put music on low. A couple of the younger ones started telling the kind of stories men tell when they finally have permission to feel something. Diesel made his rounds under the table and settled again on Della's feet. Boone sat at the head of it all with his brother's notebook beside his plate, and for the first time in 3 years, the tight thing in his chest let go a little. He watched this road-worn woman ladle chili and trade jabs with his men, and he thought, maybe this is it. Maybe she came, and she told me the truth, and now she stays, and the ghost finally gets to rest. Maybe the worst part is over. He set down his spoon. He took a long sip of water. He reached over and scratched the old dog behind the scarred ear, and Diesel groaned with contentment. "You've got a place here," Boone told Della. "Long as you want it, back room's yours." She smiled, tired but real. "Thank you." It felt like the end of the hard part. It felt like everybody could finally breathe. Then Diesel's head snapped up off the floor and a low growl started deep in his chest, and every hair on his back stood straight up. Headlights swept across the front window, 2 sets, then 3. Preacher was already at the glass. "Boone," he said, and his voice had changed completely. "There's men coming up the drive, and they're carrying." Della was on her feet before anyone else. All the tired was gone out of her. What was left underneath, it was something the men hadn't seen yet, the medic, cold and fast, the woman who'd worked under fire. "Kill the lights," she said. "Get away from the windows, now." Nobody argued. Somebody hit the switch and the clubhouse went dark. Here's where everything changed. Because up until that moment, this had been a story about kindness. About a woman with no place to go and a hard club that softened just enough to let her in. A sad story with a warm ending, chili on the stove and a dog at her feet. That story was over. What walked up the drive that night was a different kind of thing entirely. Those weren't drunks. Those weren't rivals looking for a fight over territory. Those were professionals, hired, quiet, and here to erase a problem that had a 3-year head start. And the problem wasn't just Della anymore. The problem was that notebook on the table, and now every man in that room had seen it, which meant, by the math of the men outside, every man in that room was part of the problem now too. Boone pulled his people into the back hall where there were no windows. "Talk fast," he told her. What's in the book? Names, Della whispered. Cole worked a supply route for a private contractor called the Renner Group, fuel, parts, equipment for the whole region. He figured out they were logging shipments that never existed and billing the government millions for gear that got sold off the back of the truck instead. He wrote all of it down, serial numbers, dates, the names of the men signing off. Her jaw tightened. He was going to turn it in. Somebody found out. 3 days later, his vehicle rolled over on an empty road with nobody around to see it. I got there first. I was the medic on call, and I knew the second I saw him it wasn't any accident. You don't get those injuries from a truck tipping over. You get them from men who mean it. And you kept the book. I took it off his body and I ran, Della said, because I knew if I turned it in through the wrong hands, it'd disappear, and so would I. I've been 3 years staying one town ahead of these people, trying to find a way to get it to somebody they couldn't buy or kill, somebody who'd fight. She looked around at the men in the dark hallway. Cole told me you'd fight. He said it like it was the surest thing in the world. He said, if it ever comes apart, get it to my brother, because my brother has never once in his life walked away from something that was wrong. Now stop right there, because this is the part I need to say. If you've made it this far, if you're sitting there in the dark of this story feeling your own chest go tight, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Stories like this one only get told because people like you stick around to the end. All right, back to that clubhouse and the men coming up the drive. Boone Callahan straightened up in the dark, and something settled over him, not fear, the opposite of fear. 3 years of not knowing how his brother really died had just walked up his driveway with guns, and for the first time, he had something to aim all that grief at. Rooster, he said, how many bikes in the yard? 9 plus the truck. Preacher, you still got that thing under the bar. 2 of them. Good, Boone turned to Della. How many out there? I counted 8 coming out of 3 vehicles. There'll be more we can't see. The one in front, the tall one, that's Marsh. He's the one who did Cole. He's the one who's been chasing me. If it's him, they mean to finish it tonight. He doesn't leave loose ends. That's the whole reason he's still walking around free. A phone lit up in the dark. Rooster's. He looked at the screen, then held it up. Got a text from an unknown number. Says, send out the woman and the book, everybody else walks. 2 minutes. The men looked at Boone, and Boone Callahan smiled, slow and terrible in the dark of his own clubhouse. Text him back, he said. Tell him to come get her. What happened over the next 10 minutes is the reason people in Cedar Falls still lower their voices when they talk about the Iron Saints. Boone didn't send Della out. He didn't hand over the book. Instead, he did the thing men like Marsh never planned for. He refused to play scared. He sent Rooster and 2 others out the back with the guns and orders to stay low in the tree line. He put the rest at the windows. He told Della to stay down and stay behind him, and she almost argued, and then she saw his face and didn't. And he walked out the front door of his own clubhouse alone, into the wash of 8 headlights, with his hands loose at his sides and his brother's ghost standing right behind him. You Marsh, Boone called out. The tall one stepped forward, suit under a jacket, calm voice, the kind of calm that's practiced. Mr. Callahan, this doesn't have to involve you. The woman took property that belongs to my employer. Hand her over, hand over the ledger, and we're gone. You never see us again. That property, Boone said, belonged to my brother, Cole Callahan. You remember him. Country Road 3 years back, you made it look like a rollover. For just a second, Marsh's face flickered, and that flicker told Boone everything Della hadn't been able to prove. This was the man, right there, 20 feet away. I don't know what she's told you, Marsh started. She didn't tell me anything I didn't already feel, Boone said. You want the book. The book's already gone, photographed. every page. Sent to 3 different people tonight, a reporter in Denver, a lawyer in Helena, and a federal agent in the Missoula field office who's been sitting on a Renner Group file for 2 years waiting for exactly this. You didn't come here to stop a leak, Marsh. You came here about 6 hours too late to stop anything. All you can do now is add a clubhouse full of witnesses to your list, and you don't have enough men for that. Not for this club, not on this ground. He was bluffing about the reporter and the lawyer. But he wasn't bluffing about the agent. Della had, in fact, mailed a copy from the last town she ran through, a fail-safe she'd never had the nerve to bank on. Marsh didn't know which parts were true, and a man who doesn't know which parts are true is a man who has already lost control of the room. You could see it happen. You could see him doing the math and not liking the answer. "Take them," Marsh said. It went fast after that. The first man who raised a weapon caught a warning shot from the tree line that kicked dirt across his boots and sent him diving. Rooster and the boys opened up from the dark. Not to kill, Boone had been clear, but to break, to scatter, to turn 8 coordinated professionals into 8 men, suddenly very aware they were in the open, with no idea how many guns were on them. Muzzle flash lit the yard in stutters. Somebody screamed. Glass blew out of a window as the men inside returned fire over the sill. And Diesel, old, scarred, 100-pound Diesel, came off that porch like a missile and hit the man closest to Della's window at a dead run, took him down by the arm, and did not let go. Marsh went for Boone in the chaos, because Marsh was smart and knew the head of a thing is the only part worth cutting. He came fast with a knife, low and clean, the move of a man who'd done it before. He'd done it to Cole, but he'd never done it to Cole's older brother. Boone was 51 and slower than he used to be, but he'd been fighting men bigger than him his whole life, and he stepped inside the knife instead of away from it. The one thing you're never supposed to do, the one thing that works, and caught Marsh's wrist and drove his forehead straight into the bridge of the man's nose. Marsh staggered. Boone hit him again, an elbow, then a fist. Then he had him on the gravel in the same driveway where Della had been dumped hours before, and he did not stop until the knife was gone and Marsh had stopped moving under him. He didn't kill him. Della was there by then, hand on his shoulder, saying his name, saying, "Alive, Boone. He has to be alive to talk. That's how Cole wins, alive." Boone's fist hung in the air. Everything in him wanted to bring it down. 3 years of it wanted to bring it down. Then it came down open, and he pressed Marsh's face into the dirt, and he leaned down close to the man's ear. "That was for my brother," he said. "You're going to live a long time in a small room, and every day of it is going to be for him too." By the time the county sheriffs came screaming up the drive, someone had finally called them. Half the neighborhood had heard the gunfire. It was over. 3 of Marsh's men had run into the trees and been rounded up cold and shaking. 2 were down with leg wounds, cursing. 1 was still trying to get his arm back from a German shepherd who had absolutely no intention of returning it. And Marsh himself was zip-tied to the porch rail with his own broken nose dripping into his lap. Not one iron saint was killed. Preacher took a graze across the shoulder that he wore like a medal for the rest of his life. That was the worst of it. And on the long table inside, under the kitchen light, sat Cole Callahan's ledger, open to the last page, where 3 years ago a 19-year-old boy from Montana had written down the names of the men who were going to kill him, and trusted that someday his brother would make it mean something. It did mean something. It took months, but it did. The federal agent in Missoula was real, and the copy Della mailed was real. And once the Iron Saints handed over the original with a clubhouse full of sworn witnesses and a bound contractor with a broken nose, the Renner Group came apart at every seam. The fake shipments, the stolen equipment, the road where Cole died. It turned out Marsh had done it more than once to more than one soldier who asked the wrong question. Della's testimony put the last nail in. So did the ledger. So did the dog, in a way, because the story of a scarred German shepherd who knew a dead soldier's medic on sight got told and retold, until it reached people who started asking how a working dog from an overseas unit had ended up in a Montana clubhouse in the first place. And that thread, pulled hard enough, unraveled things nobody was ever supposed to find. Here's how Diesel got there, since I know you're wondering. Cole had been his handler. When Cole died, the dog was declared washed out, too aggressive, too damaged, that scar down his shoulder from the same night that killed his handler. He was going to be put down. Boone, who barely knew the dog existed, had gotten one phone call from a kennel sergeant who'd served with Cole and couldn't stomach it, and Boone drove 1,100 miles to pick up a dog he'd never met because it was the last living thing his brother had loved. Diesel bit him twice on the way home. Boone kept driving. 3 years that dog trusted no one. And then Della Voss walked up to the gate, and Diesel smelled the one person left alive who'd been there in the dirt that night, the hands that had worked to save the man they'd both loved, and something in that broken animal finally came untied. Della stayed. Of course she stayed. The back room became hers, and then it became more than a back room. She kept the books, like she said she would, and it turned out she was better at it than anyone the club had ever had. Every dollar accounted for, every bill paid early. She cooked Sunday dinners that grew until they filled the whole long table and spilled out into the yard. She was the one people came to when things went wrong, because she was calm in a way you only get from holding dying men and refusing to fall apart. The Iron Saints didn't take in a stranger that night. They got back a piece of a brother they thought was gone for good. And Boone changed too. The thing he'd been carrying for 3 years, the not knowing, the closed casket his mother wouldn't believe, it finally had somewhere to go. He and Della would sit out on the porch some evenings after everyone else had turned in, the old dog between them, and she'd tell him another small true thing about Cole, how he laughed, what he was scared of. The last thing he said, which Boone made her repeat more than once because it was worth repeating, "Tell my brother I wasn't scared. Tell him I got it written down." He got it written down. His brother made sure it got to Montana, and his brother made it mean something. A year on, they put up a small stone at the edge of the property, near the tree line where Rooster and the boys had held the dark. Nothing fancy. Cole's name, his years, and under it the words the club voted on together. He got it written down. Diesel took to lying beside it in the afternoons when the sun came around that side of the yard, and no one ever moved him. You remember how this started. A woman shoved into the gravel. A duffel bag split open, everything she owned rolled in the dirt, 6 men who watched and didn't lift a hand. A dog barking on the other side of a locked gate. That's where we came in. Now picture that same gate a year later standing open. Picture the same woman walking through it, only she's not bleeding and she's not begging. She's carrying a pot of chili to a table full of men who'd put their bodies between her and a bullet without thinking twice. Picture the scarred old dog trotting ahead of her like he owns the place, because in every way that counts, he does. The mark on her wrist never faded any more than it already had. Cole had the same one. So did every man and woman who served in that unit, the living and the dead. It used to be the thing that stopped Boone Callahan cold at a gate on a dark night. Now it was just Family, Inc. Now it was the reason a road-weary woman with no place left to go found the one place in the whole world that had been waiting for her without knowing it. She asked to stay and take care of the club. They almost turned her away. Thank God they didn't.